Lee and Member Honeck for absence. Tony is here to take his place, and Member Taiperi for lateness, and Councillor Wayne Walker for absence on council business.
Move.
Apologies. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so Councillor Collins and Member Taiperi for lateness. So I move it.
Apologies for leaving at 12:15.
And likewise,
Yeah.
there's quite a few of us going to the Women's Suffrage Day anniversary, so if we can be disciplined and get through and help the chair, we'll all be able to get there on time.
Yep, it's on the agenda. If we're still going to, we're going to stop at 12:15.
Can I move the whole agenda then?
I'll second that.
So look, I'll second the apologies, Chair.
Okay.
I know that Councillor Simpson moved them.
She jumped in, righto. We've got to move in a second. All those in favour?
Aye.
Okay, any declaration of interest from anyone? No declaration of interest. Just confirmation of the previous minutes. Moved by Deputy Mayor. Well done. Seconded by myself. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. There are no petitions, no public input, no local board input, no extraordinary items, no notices of motion today. So we have a review of the funding, the annual plan. So we have coming up, we've got a number of people. Alistair, yep. Dave, are we going to have everyone up or not? David and team, James, Jonathan, Shona.
Quite well.
We've got enough seats. I think you can come up.
Sorry.
Okay, so Tania and Alistair, right. Welcome all.
Morena tātou. The report before you this morning contains a review of the decision to support an annual Auckland Arts Festival on a trial basis. While I'll predominantly take the report as read, I just briefly wanted to draw your attention to a few aspects of the decision that you're being asked to make today. In 2014, the former Budget Committee resolved to support the Auckland Festival Trust transition from a 2-yearly festival to an annual festival. This was on a trial basis only. Now that the festival was held in 2016 and again in 2017, this committee is asked to decide in principle whether it supports continuation of a festival on the annual basis. The committee is not being asked to decide the level of funding that the Trust will receive as a regional amenity. That decision is for the Auckland Regional Amenities Funding Board. The Funding Board will separately scrutinise the application before it, which I believe goes to them formally on the 25th of September, and they will decide the level of funding for the Trust. Just by way of illustration, when Council decided to support an annual event, the Funding Board increased funding to the Trust by approximately $1 million per year. It received that additional funding over 2015-16 and again in 2016-17. The report before you sets out the advantages and disadvantages, a review of those in moving to an annual event. It recommends that the committee continues to support the annual festival, and it also recommends that staff write to the Funding Board requesting that it keeps a watching brief over the festival and its impact on other arts organisations. Essentially, the Trust has done what was asked of it when Council first decided to move to the annual event. Most importantly, I think that the sector generally shows support for the festival, more so than it did at the time that the original decision was made to support the annual event. I'll take the remainder of the report as read and address any questions that the committee may have. Just to let you know that the Auckland Festival Trust is also alongside us should you wish to directly ask questions from them.
So just quite clear on the funding, it was 4.6 for two festivals, and it's now 6.6 for 3 years, is it right? It's working out at 2.2 per year on an annual basis, as compared to 2.3 before, when it was every second year.
So, yeah,
So we originally
Nice.
received about 4.3 for each festival on a 2-yearly basis.
Yep.
We now have received roughly 6.3, 6.6 over the same period, but we deliver 2 festivals.
Yep, okay.
So the price didn't double.
Right, sorry, Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Could someone from the Trust potentially answer my question around sponsorship? That's the only area that appeals to be a bit weak. Is it your thoughts around the reason for inability to be able to find that contra and cash sponsorship for as much as you've had? It's been dropping. So
Sorry, David, do you just want to introduce your team?
Yes, sure, yeah. Jonathan Bielski beside me on my right is our Artistic Director. Nick Kalayan is our Chair of Finance, and Shona Roberts behind me is our Business and Finance Director.
I mean, just interested in that particular downward
Yep.
too.
Contras remained very close to the same level.
Right.
We have great support from NZME and Cleanso and Auckland Airport, etc., which has allowed our marketing to stay at the forefront and not incur additional cash spend. It's fair to say we didn't double the cash income, but we certainly are generating more over the same 2-year period than we did previously. Cash sponsorship is a challenge, there's no question about it, for all arts organisations. Where we've been working mostly is in developing our
David,
individual
can you
giving.
just pull that
Yep,
speaker
sure.
in front of you there?
Where we've been working mainly is in developing individual giving and working at smaller corporate cash sponsorships as opposed to the big ones we all used to get in the past. So it's looking promising for this year. We will get more cash income than we did the festival just gone, and it's core that contra remains very strong, especially for our marketing.
Thank you.
Councillor Casey.
Yeah, thanks, David. I've got 2 questions, the usual ones. I'm interested in your reach into the free and low-cost programming, and you've collapsed both together, so I can't actually separate out which costs nothing from what costs a little. So my first question is, can you separate them out and talk about them separately, or is there no need to do that? And my second question relates to both geographical reach, because I know you went to Glen Innes and Mangere. I'm not sure where else outside of the CBD.
East,
you went to,
west,
hang on,
north and
hang on.
south.
I'll finish my
All over the
question.
show.
I'm also interested, though, in your reach into our demographic profile populations, such as Pacifica, Maori, and other ethnic groups. And from what I read in the report, it's much the same in 2013 as it was in 2011. So what's your projection out for the
I'll hand
trial
to
period?
Jonathan for that one.
Yes, thank you. So I've just joined the organisation as the artistic director, so I sort of come in with some fresh eyes, but also some opinions. So I guess I'll unpack those questions in a number of different ways. The best way to think about the proportion of people who are attending paid ticketed events and free is that of the 196,000 people who attended this year, 60,000 of them purchased tickets. So the overwhelming majority of people who are participating in the festival are attending free events. And there are a whole lot of different events in the festival that are taking place in different parts of Auckland. I don't want to list them all, but the major proportion of the festival's participation is free, and it's certainly our intention to keep growing that because the demand is so high. People are interested in participating in the festival. We're lucky to have plenty of people who want to buy a ticket, but also a lot of people want to come along and participate free. In the next festival, we're going to be introducing a number of new initiatives that specifically address the issue of low cost and free. So one of the things that we would like to be able to do is to give an opportunity for people who would like to go to the ticketed events, the ones that cost money, but at a very low ticket price, and in some cases free. And so we're going to introduce some targeted programs for that specifically. That will give us an opportunity to welcome in people who are interested in going to big ticket items like your Giselles and your 1984s, but who couldn't dream of paying the ticket price. Because as a publicly subsidised festival, we feel quite strongly that a major pillar of our identity has to be providing free and low-cost access to the events.
And your reach into the communities such as Pacifica and Maori?
Yes.
Well, we have had a significant increase in the numbers of people coming from the non-European audiences, if you like. Asian audiences, these are figures we have, represent 9% of total audiences. Maori 6% and Pacifica 3%, which is a 33% increase in those groups to that which we had 2 festivals ago. So we are working hard in this area, and I believe that we will continue to see more participation by those groups than we have had in the past.
And the other bit was the geographical spread of the festival and making sure that you give people access in their own communities to great events.
Well, I think last time we had work in Warkworth, we had work on the North Shore, we had work in Glen Innes, we had work in Mangere, and we had work obviously down in Manukau. So a reasonable spread, I believe.
No, the question was what are you doing to increase that spread?
We introduced a program last year called Whānui, which was supported partly by the Arts Council, CNZ and Foundation North, and mostly by ourselves with the support of your funding, of course, that developed work within communities for communities. There were 5 projects last year, pilot projects, and we're growing that program this year and certainly intend to grow that over the next 3 years. So that's taking working with communities in communities like Manukau last year with the Rising Oceans work, like the housing project, Kauwhai Cope we did in Glen Innes. So they're real community-based programs, and I think that's how we'll grow our footprint. We can't expect everybody to always come to the city, even though we're putting in pricing strategies to help that and some transport strategies, but the core to us is growing that whānui, that outreach program, to be real, meaningful and increase the numbers.
Thanks, David. Good to hear.
Thank you. My question's largely been asked, actually, in terms of the diversification and increase in Māori-specific population attending. So we've seen a 100% increase from 3% to 6%. It's still not enough, but just encourage you to keep on the same pathway as what Councillor Casey's been talking about. See that geographical stretch go beyond Manukau if possible in terms of the Manirua and the Papakura Franklin communities, where possible. So it's really just a plug to increase or diversify its program audience and geographical reach, and in particular both Māori artists, events and audience attendance, which was put on the table, I think, previously. So just to say we're watching this and we'd love to see the spread and the diversification. But Councillor Casey pretty much asked my question, mate. So, thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's right that some of the questions are being raised in regards to the spread of free tickets, geographic, demographic considerations. I was just curious, for the trust, you can see in paragraph 30 what we're going to be writing to you about in terms of our expectations from council if we do indeed pass option 1. And that last point is about collaborating across the council group to leverage other council-funded activities. So I'm just curious as to, is that a discussion that you would already, when you read those words, would you know what council means when it says leveraging your work across other council-funded activities? Or is that something that this discussion needs to ensue?
Yes, no, it is. I mean, we're in conversation with different parts of council that are involved with event activity. For example, the festival works with the council-funded galleries or board-funded galleries as part of the visual arts program. We work with Panuku and regional facilities Auckland extensively. So there's quite a lot of connections between the festival and various parts of council. Now, there's always more to do, and we're increasing that conversation, but it's already quite embedded in the way the festival works now.
Okay, thanks.
Can you just confirm that, I mean, it's great you had the highest attendance and the second highest box office, but it was really bad weather this year. So how much do you think that would have affected your take? I mean, do you think it potentially could have been 10% higher, 20% higher?
Yeah, somewhere between 5 and 10, I think. It was mainly around the power plant on that opening weekend. And of course, that weather stopped them coming out as well.
Yeah.
But we're only just short of our biggest box office of 3.1 in 2013 when we had the huge Group F show at the Domain. So they were very close.
Every weekend was stormy.
Yeah.
And just one more other question is, there was concern from other arts providers that moving to an annual festival might start to crowd them out a bit, but I believe there's greater acceptance. Can you confirm the acceptance and how you are working with them successfully?
So we work closely with the APO, of course. That's used to do 3 concerts every 2 years. Now we do 6 effectively. This year, 1984 will play at Auckland Theatre Company's venue in association with them for 2.5 weeks. We're partnering with the Opera for Candide, which was released last week. Then we work with Q Theatre. We work with Silo, the Poe Theatre out in. And so I think it's, if anything, it's increased opportunities across all organisations.
And if I may, and that's been my finding, having spoken to a number of arts organisations, particularly regional amenities, is that moving to an annual festival has forced collaboration in a lot of circumstances.
Councillor Philippine.
Kia ora, Chair. Tēnā rā koutou katoa. Look, people have asked around the audiences, but my question is around companies, Māori Pacific, other ethnic groups performing within the Arts Festival. So is there a breakdown with that? I mean...
Your question relates to the artists, the percentage of artists
within
from...
the organisations that you end up
Yeah.
performing in the Arts Festival, breakdown and the area around other ethnic groups performing as part of the festival.
Yeah. I guess as an observer at the last couple of festivals, I mean, I would say that I think that the artists who are on stage are quite diverse because the festival takes place in a lot of different places around Auckland. But what we don't, I don't think we have statistics on that, though, that I can give you. But that's my impression of it. Perhaps I'll just give you an insight into my thinking about how we're planning the festival going forward, is that I've had a lot of conversation with various community groups, and one of the things that's very clear to me is that for the festival to have a greater penetration into Auckland, it needs to be relevant for people. And so the festival has several strands to it. One is where we're curating something and putting it in front of the audience and saying, here we've chosen something, we endorse this, you come and see it. But the other strand has to be back the other way, where there's a conversation rather than us saying, here's what you have to see. It's what does the festival need to do for it to be relevant for you and for your community? Because as you get further and further away from the middle of the city, not everyone is interested in seeing the ballet or the symphony orchestra. And so those performances are not relevant for all of Auckland. So that's why those conversations happen, and we have projects like Whānui, which we're going to expand, which is community-led. So we're inverting the power structure where we provide the resource and the communities provide the voice and make the decisions about what the projects are.
Cool, thanks.
Very good. Meg off.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Jonathan, for that explanation. I think that's really good. It does need to be a two-way process, and you've probably got the sense around the table about it, and I think you're making really good progress towards that, and I think the annual festival and collaborating with the other groups is terrific. A city of our size needs an annual festival. My question is really on why our private sponsorship dropped by about 140,000 last year. Given that the festival's getting bigger, it seems to be succeeding in so many other ways. Why has there been a drop-off in private sector sponsorship, apart from, obviously it's always a competitive field, but are people who have sponsored it in the past giving you an explanation as to why they're not willing to continue to sponsor it? Do you get any feedback on that? David, I don't know whether that comes in your area.
We in fact got a new sponsor last year, Auckland University, so sponsors do rotate.
Yeah.
And I think just moving from annual, some of the investments were still seen as a 2-year investment. We're working to get those back to an annual investment now. There's no question that had a slight dip, although in our individual giving it actually grew. So, And not all our sponsorship shows the sponsorship. There's a number of trusts that would show under our individual giving and under our patron schemes, like Sir James Wallace, for example. But yes, it is a challenge to get that cash back up. We've taken a new strategy this year. We've got 3 people working with us in targeted communities to try and get business communities to try and build that back up again. We've had some success already.
Yep. That's
But
good.
as I said earlier, the contra is actually crucial because in our books, it's what we would have to buy. We don't put contra in the book that is an add-on. It's core business for us, the contra income.
Great. Thank you.
I think there's little doubt that there's less appetite from major corporates to sponsor anything, frankly, than there was a few years ago. A few years ago, we could collect large sums of money from major corporates, but that doesn't seem to be available anymore.
It's kind of counterintuitive, though, isn't it? Because a few years ago, we were in the aftermath of the global financial crisis. People say they're doing reasonably well at the moment. You'd think that the wallets might be a little more open than they were in the past.
Would that they were.
Yeah, I mean, I think that given the growth of the economy in Auckland in absolute terms and also the growth in income because commodities, etc., are doing quite well, you would have expected people to have a little more flexibility in being able to sponsor. So, you know, if we're not doing well on sponsorship in the good times, what happens when the economic cycle turns? That would be my worry.
Councillor Fletcher.
Mine is to speak to the matter rather than a question.
I'm blending it. Yep.
Well, I'm pleased to follow the Mayor on that issue, and I think what I'd like to do is take you back in history 20 years to what was intended with the Auckland Festival. The Auckland Festival was something that had been talked about for a long time. There was a very energetic supporter in a woman by the name of Christine Webby, who really wanted to get a festival off the ground. And along with the Top Twins, they coerced me to actually make a formal commitment to, as Mayor, as part of a mayoral campaign, to commit to the Auckland Festival. And that was back in 1998. And it tells me just how long it takes. And it was always intended to be an annual festival. And it's quite nice to see David Rankin here today as the poor officer who was charged with sort of doing the numbers to get it off the ground. In fact, when we sort of launched the fact that we were going to have the festival, we built a lake over the car park in our TIA centre here, and I rather suspect it might be part of the reason that we have had a few leaky problems there now. But with that aside, I'd just like to highlight the fact that it was inextricably linked to the establishment of Q Theatre, and it was prior to the establishment of the regional, the Auckland, what am I trying to say? The Auckland Regional Amenities Funding Act. And in a way, I think, in answering the Mayor, that is actually part of the problem for getting that corporate sponsorship off the ground. And I genuinely believe that until we're willing to nail government, whatever colour it might be, down to repealing the amenities funding and actually looking again at what the needs are, that the Auckland Festival was going to be designed, it was launched very much alongside of Auckland First City of the Tamaki Makaurau First City of the Pacific. It was meant to be a Pacific festival, it was meant to have that outreach, and I think we really owe a huge amount of debt to the people who held that vision. You know, I've acknowledged David Rankin. I'd like to acknowledge my former husband, Angus Fletcher, who went on the original trust board along with Victoria Carter, Lex Henry and others who have come along, and John Judge and those who are here today. I really want to thank them. But I think they've got their arm up their back to a degree in terms of the funding. We need to do our part in the advocacy of getting the regional amenities funding off the ground, because that is, I think, giving a false sense of comfort to potential commercial entities that will come along and say, well, look, they're getting that money automatically. I think that it was intended that organisations like the Auckland Philharmonia, who were really struggling for funding at the time, it would all be linked into Auckland's festival. So congratulations to you. You've carried the mantle extremely proudly. It's something that all Aucklanders look forward to with eager anticipation. The weather is always going to be a factor, and I understand the plea that we're hearing from Member Kaki here and from Councillor Casey, that it must have a regional outreach. But it was always intended, and I suppose to a degree, there will always be a sense of civicness to the event, because it was built in and around, the initial concept was built in and around the Auckland's art quarter of that time, which was, the Aotea precinct. And I think that is the shop front for the Auckland Festival. Yes, we must have that outreach. Yes, it must continue to have that Pacific flavour, that passionate Pacific point of difference that we have. But I believe that it must continue annually. And if we can do our part as a council to persuade government to come to the party in terms of understanding that the way that we have a selected group of organisations that have guaranteed funding, it's just unacceptable. This is going to be the opportunity for the festival to shine, to find the funding and to play a much more responsible role in the leadership and vision for arts in Tamaki Makaurau. So I would just like to thank everyone, and particularly those who have served in a governance sense on the board and those who work with Q Theatre, without which I don't think the two projects would have ever got off the ground without each other. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hope that all members can support the recommendations today, and I'm happy to move them. Oh, they're moved.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm more than happy to support this recommendation. I think the figures show that it's been an outstanding success. They speak for themselves. So if we look at the attendance figures, more than 196,000 attended. That's up more than 30,000 from just 2016. Large percentage of those, a third, are new audiences. So we're reaching out to new people all the time. People have talked about the geographical spread across Auckland. That's important, and it's good to see that there's a real focus getting put on that. One thing that hasn't been mentioned, but I find particularly pleasing, is the engagement with our school communities. So I see that over 6,000 students attended the festival at a heavily subsidised rate, and a large percentage of those were from decile 1 and 2 schools. So, I really applaud this effort to get out and to engage with the young, and that's actually reflected furthermore in overall analysis of the number of people under the age of 40 that are going, which is nearly 50%. So I think this annualisation has been a huge success, and it can only get better. I'm sure the board are more than aware of the need to come up with sponsorship and alternative sources of funding, and indeed there seems to be a bit of a reset there where that's on the upward trajectory in some parts. So I see Auckland becoming quite the centre of arts. Perhaps we can maybe rival Edinburgh at some point, but there's a potential to do what they've done in Scotland, where things just gets bigger and bigger, and there's a huge benefit, not just to Auckland but to the country as a whole. So I think that this is really a success story, and I think you have a lot of people in Auckland now say roll on March when the Auckland Arts Festival is coming. So congratulations.
Councillor Hills.
Kia ora. Thank you so much for coming here and presenting to us. I think the festival this year was fantastic. I definitely support. I'm not 100% clear. It says they'll decide the level of funding, but I hope it stays the same, not a decrease. I noticed that in 2003 the actual funding council gave us 4.4 million, so that was a long time ago, and we're giving a lot more funding. So for what you do and what you've done this year on that funding is pretty amazing. I went to a lot of the shows. I know that the whānui, I went to I Spy, and Councillor Holson and I were involved with the repertoire, those events, and they were largely Māori and Pacifica people, young people from our community involved in both of those outreach programs in the community. And that was largely funded by Creative New Zealand, not us, but that was fantastic, and I loved that was involving young people in the arts, but actually getting them to present a lot of the art as well. Also, I thought the shows were pretty diverse. I think one thing I went to, there was an opera that was sung in English, Cantonese and Māori in the same show. and there was the other shows in the Spiegel tent, I think, Respect or something, that was all New Zealand, Māori and Pacifica singers. And yeah, I just think there was such a different number of events that I've ever seen before, you know, right across Auckland. So it was pretty amazing. I'm sure you can, you know, get more sponsorship. That would be great. But I know that we put a lot of funding into other things such as sports and, you know, infrastructure. But I think a lot of the time art doesn't get the level of excitement and funding that it should or that it deserves. And I think that if it wasn't raining, you would have knocked those figures out. I think every single weekend of the festival it was storms, so all the outdoor events, and also I'm sure the events throughout the RTS Centre were affected by that rain, like the zoo figures have been as well. But yeah, I just want to congratulate you. I'm so glad that we are making this an annual festival, and as you know, our international city, we should be doing something like this annually, and I know it has a big economic boost to the city, but also you know, involves so many people from the artists, but also getting other people in to see international artists that they would never seen before. So thank you very much.
Okay. Councillor Filipiana.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I'm not going to go over the previous three speakers, but look, it would have been good under 12 at the first bullet point, even though it's Central Auckland focused, that there was some comment made around the outreach that you have across Tamaki Makaurau. Because for me, seeing that was, here we go again, Auckland focus, Auckland City focus, but it's not. And that got borne out with the questions that were asked by Member Kake and also Councillor Casey. So, you know, just explaining that. Chair, a question around the actual recommendations, and I know that Tania ended up mentioning in principle, do we need to put that in the recommendation, or is it okay with how we've got it now?
Well, it is strong enough, I think.
Okay, cool.
And we do notice that a RAFA is the one that actually do
Understand
final
that, but it's just a comment.
backwards.
It was just a comment that was made when she first spoke, and hence the question. Thank you.
I mean, councillors, when it comes to the LTP, I mean, we're going to have a good hard look at the arts budgets, full stop, and RAFA's funding and all that, because a lot of the arts organisations are under pressure, and especially those that are more people reliant as compared to buildings or anything. We are sweating some assets out there, and they're not just buildings. We are sweating people in some organisations, and we need to be cognisant of that. So we have a mover and a seconder, and I think this probably will go through unanimously. So I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, team. Thank you, David. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you.
We'd just like to thank you for your ongoing support.
Thank you, Rick. Right. Ella and Alistair. Again, Alistair doesn't need to stay, and we've got Hanua Forests.
Morena councillors and chair. I also have with me here Richard O'Connor from Watercare for any questions in respect of the company's activity. This report seeks the exemption of Hanua Forests Limited from Local Government Act accountability requirements. Earlier this year, Watercare acquired 100% of the shares of the company that is now Hanua Forests Limited. Watercare appoints both of the directors to the company, so it is a council-controlled organisation under the legislative definition. The legislation allows, in section 7.3, for local authorities to exempt council-controlled organisations from accountability requirements. It should be noted that Hanua Forests Limited's assets have now been sold or transferred to Watercare, so the company is effectively dormant. On that note, I would seek for the recommendations to be approved. That is the exemption under 7.3 of the Act, and the second recommendation being to review this exemption in September 2019, which aligns with all of our other existing exemptions, but it is likely that this company will be wound up before that time. Any questions?
I'll move.
Move, seconder.
A second.
Councillor Filipano is seconding.
Question?
No questions?
Just a quick question.
Yep.
So I don't have a problem with the mechanics of deregistration, that just makes sense, but as far as the actual physical assets up there, the forestry, I presume Watercare is going to continue to extract the forestry and then replant as it extracts into natives as planned?
Yep, that's correct. So we're working, the harvesting period will be over the next 20 years. So the forests have been sold to Matariki Forests, and there's an area which is remaining in ownership of Watercare where we're making a decision whether we will harvest or that area will be kept to protect the Hanua water catchment. So as the trees are harvested, we're working with iwi to come up with a plan to plant native trees. When the native bush is at a certain coverage, the land is going to be given back to council as a park. So that's the plan. So that'll be a progressive plan over the next 20 years as the forests are harvested and the native trees are planted.
Who owns Matariki Forests?
It's Rainier, and it's a commercial enterprise.
Right, we have no more questions, so we have a move and a second. I'll put those resolutions. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Thank you very much. All passed. Right, we will move on to the Panuka report. David and Brenna. You've lost your partner,
I seem to have temporarily lost Brenna, Mr Chairman, yeah. I'm sure she'll be joining us. I don't propose to give too much of an introduction to the item, Mr Chairman, because we had a workshop that was well attended by councillors, so I won't sort of repeat everything that was said there. I suppose the main points really to recap are that Panuku was formed in late 2015 with a mix of objectives, but essentially looking to step up the council's footprint in the urban regeneration comprehensive redevelopment space. And fairly soon after our formation, we came to you for the approval of a program of, among other things, transform and support priority locations. Now, in addition to that, we had what we called support locations and normal disposals, which are if you like, the way that we fund the asset sales program. As I noted a minute ago, we were set up with a mix of strategic objectives, and periodically in these forums, in our own company, stakeholders, media, we get debate about how we balance all those things out, because we obviously have a town centre regeneration strategic objective, which includes inherently investment in public amenity in these centres as we, over time, repurpose a number of them. We've got sustainability objectives, economic development objectives, certain locations we're trying to achieve affordability objectives, and then of course overlaying all this is a fairly significant revenue objective which carries on in our statement of intent. And indeed, my observation would be that largely that revenue obligation has carried on pretty much unchanged from the pre-formation of Panuku, and really reflects the fact, for those that were here before the last election, Auckland Council Property Limited was essentially a revenue generating entity operating on a fully commercial basis. And so if we think about the future, we all need to be clear that's either the model we're working on or it's not, because clearly those strategic objectives that I listed before have resource and value implications, which we've discussed with you on a number of occasions over the last probably year. So the LTP is the place that I think we've all envisaged would ultimately be where the council needs to revisit our mix of strategic objectives and the financial kind of resource envelope that goes with that, so that we all end up with a consistent understanding of what Panuku is being funded to do in terms of those broader strategic objectives, versus continuing to produce revenue. Because, as I've said a number of times, there's a clear trade-off there, and we can't do both at the same time to the degree that meets expectations. So the approach that we have, I guess, recommended to put on the table for discussion, which we had a chance to discuss at the workshop with you, is essentially building on the principle of reinvestment. We've noted that we've already got reinvestment for the transform locations, for the Housing for Older Persons network of villages. We were optimising current service assets. All those we've already got an understanding about reinvestment. The proposal we've put for you now is to extend that really and look at the transform and unlock locations together as a program over time, where we're able to reinvest the proceeds in the, if you like, a closed loop there of that program, really recognising that as a package, and I would note that if you look at the locations, they represent quite a good balance across the region, and taken together do represent a significant strategic intervention by you through us over the next 10 years to achieve and support the growth strategy. And the smartest way, given the limitations on resources in our view, is to balance resources across that program, recognising that some areas are going to get relatively more than others out of that approach, but the reality is that at the moment all that money is taken for other purposes for the LTP. So it is a question fundamentally of how much you wish to invest in that strategy to support intensification. Our understanding, as we all do, that will need change in town centres, and a lot of the change that's required, the investment, won't come as a result of a commercial development approach. Clearly, within the proposition we put on the table, there are options, and I guess we're looking to this LTP process to really sort out on a continuum where you want us to be and to make sure we have an aligned understanding about that. So there's no understanding that we can produce outcomes that are out of line with the resources that have been allocated for it. I think that's all I need to say by way of introduction, Mr. Chairman, and we're happy to take questions.
So, does everyone understand conceptually that from the workshop that David came back, instead of presenting it as project by project, it was done as a package, because overall we can pretty well balance that package out financially, and of course it's a business case for each one, but if that chart on page 87 indicates where we've got positives and where we've got negatives, and clearly some of them, only Hanger and Northcote especially, and Henderson as well.
And that's still a fluid picture, obviously, Mr. Chairman, because we're interacting in the LTP process, but the clear understanding we're putting forward is that there would be a self-funding program. Yeah.
So, Councillor, I'd just ask you not to try and focus on one individual area or anything, because that's going to come back, or the cases will come back. But remember, going back about 3 or 4 years ago, we tried to get the concept of spatial priorities understood around the table. Not everyone was winning into that. So if you look at just point number 4, that pretty well sums it up, though, because that is the spatial priorities almost. As we said to Panuka, go and re-interrogate that and see that we're on the right track there, and pretty well they came back without any exception. I think that these are the areas that we need to focus on first up. It doesn't mean to say that other town centres won't get looked at, and that's where the One Initiative program has been looked at as part of the LTP, where we asked each local board to come back with something. Many of the local boards that are mentioned on this page here on 87, that's what their one priority has been worked out as, so we just then need to look at the others, and some are not asking for much and some asking for a bit more. Councillor Holst.
Thank you. I'm actually happy to move the recommendation, Mr. Chair. I'd like to speak to the recommendation when you're ready, but my question is, when it comes to the LTP debate and discussion, is that the time when we can actually understand the wider business case that this allows for? In other words, is LTP the time when we will interrogate a little bit more closely the potential over 10, 15 to 20 years of these unlock areas to start to pay their way? Is that when that discussion might be able to be had?
Yeah, we're happy in that process to participate with whatever information you like. I think we've got the next scheduled event is the 26th when there's a workshop, the infrastructure work stream, and obviously if you would like more detail. But essentially, yes, we would expect at some point, I mean, we obviously have a draft sort of indicative list of projects and values for each of the locations. So we're happy to share that information and pull together whatever else that you might want.
I think that would be useful, Mr Chair, because that might mitigate some of the concerns that people have, bearing in mind we need to be putting a 10 to 20 year time frame on our planning here, not a 3-year time frame. So I'm happy to speak to it when you're ready for me to.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher.
Oh, Mr Chairman, I was actually going to speak to it, but simply to say what you said, so I don't think I need to repeat that. So I'm just supporting the recommendations.
Okay, Councillor Cashmore.
Yes, thanks. So, David, my question relates to the long-term, short, medium and long-term viability, rather than going back the other way, of Panuku, so you can actually do as much as you can, as well as you can, within a smaller budget from us as you can. So with these Transform and Unlock are all big projects. Is there a potential to use, through your own 10-year plan, smaller projects to add cash to help subsidise across the field where it needs to subsidise? Because some of these ones are, these big ones are long-term projects, multi-investor, long-term, and once you've got that, you're increasing risk factors and holding costs. So what I'm saying is the mix right?
Well, we think the program mix is right because you're correct, some of them are big and long-term, but the big ones, including, for example, Manukau, it's not like nothing will happen for 8 years and then suddenly it will all appear. So these will all be progressive. We're aiming to get sites in Manukau to the market before Christmas. We're underway with some works in partnership with Auckland Transport and Putney Way. So these will be like the waterfront. Brittamart's another example where things will happen over a long period of time, based on when the market's ready, and we'll be balancing expenditure. So that's the first point. The second point is that, yes, in addition to this program of Transform and Unlocks, we have other locations. Link Crescent, I think we've discussed with you before, in Stanmore Bay, there's, 50 or 60 units going up there by the town centre on a site that will realise full value to go into the general asset sales program. The site that was in the news the other day, Dominion Road, same thing, 100 units, full value for ratepayers. So there's a mix across our whole program, ranging from simple disposals to one-site developments, and then these bigger programs which themselves will be staggered.
So as a subsequent, Mr Chair, Karen, so each project there will be some crossovers of one project helping subsidise another to get started and so forth. How would you work the accounting so you can actually see the optics of each project's bottom line?
Well, obviously, we'll need, if this concept is approved, we are effectively moving money around a program of Transform and Unlocks, with the exception of the waterfront, then that will need a whole financial recording system behind it. But that's pretty much how we're organised in any case. We have location-based expenditure largely.
Right. Thank you.
And then also, quite clearly in the LTP, we've got some infrastructure, placemaking investment already in the old annual plan, long-term plan, and probably would continue in maybe others. So there could be a new library built in one area that we're already allowing for. It's just a matter, so that does help facilitate and get areas moving a little bit earlier than would be anticipated. So, Councillor Casey.
Well, thanks for mentioning Dominion Road, David. I was going to mention it. I do have a different view from the Mayor about use of public land. in terms of putting up an expensive gated community which the local board opposes. But it was about that I wanted to ask you. In your preamble you said, and I quote, "In certain locations we are trying to achieve affordability objectives." What do you mean by that? In certain locations? Is it like the Dominion Road? If you think it's a good place to put housing that's not affordable, you'll do it?
Yes, I think that question illustrates very well, Councillor, the comments I made in my introduction, which is we have a mix of objectives, and we all know that we have an obligation that you give us every year to raise, in this year, $100 million worth of sales. So quite clearly, we can't go all through this year, every location, not worrying about the revenue that we're going to receive and prioritise other objectives completely. Equally, we don't approach any site, including Dominion Road, with no regard for these other outcomes that we have. So we have to make judgments on your behalf about the mix of objectives that we apply in each site. And so if I take two that have been in the news, Barracliff Place and Manukau, we clearly have an objective there of achieving a substantive level of affordable housing, and we're prepared to accept some trade-offs there. In other locations, what we're doing is prioritising density and good design with revenue. So the answer to your question is we have a mix of objectives, and yes, it means that as we look at different sites, we have to prioritise different things to achieve the mix of things you've asked of us.
So we don't know when and where our affordable housing will be built, really, as elected members?
Well, generally we share through the quarterly reporting and other information sharing where we're planning to incorporate affordability components to our development locations. I mean, we don't make a secret of it. We're generally pretty happy and pretty transparent about what we're trying to do in our different locations. And if you recall, one of the whole reasons that we talked to you about the significance of transform and unlock locations is because we said to you those are the areas where we would most expect these other strategic objectives to be prioritised.
So just the final question is just based on something that's in the report, but what you haven't mentioned, and it's just an expansion on the statement about exemplar residential projects. Are we going to see some green hat thinking on provision of affordable housing? I'm talking about the bottom end of the market. Is that what you mean by exemplar? Are you looking at different ways of filling that low income gap or not? I'm hoping you are, by the way, in your answer.
Yes, exemplar, as the word suggests, means locations where we're trying to provide something that's a good example. Could be affordability, could be a sustainability objective, and so yes, there will be examples where there will be exemplar sites where affordability is a key priority.
Great. When can we expect to see the first exemplar that would give us some
Well,
comfort?
Depending how it works out, Councillor, that's what we're currently trying to get a substantial component of at Barracliff. And we're also, without going into too much detail here, we have ongoing discussions with providers of prefabricated housing, community housing providers, our partnership with Housing New Zealand. I mean, we recently did a swap with Housing New Zealand, or a sale in Avondale, to enable it to put in, I think, about 20 or 25 social housing units close to the Avondale town centre. There's another site in Avondale where 3 years ago we reached an agreement with the Housing Foundation in Trent Street, and there are 33 units gone in on shared equity basis. So this does go on and is just an ongoing part of our business, but we don't have the resources to do it in every location all the time.
I'd actually like to compliment you on what Panuka is doing in the affordable housing, because the councillors, remember, around this table, the majority decided to remove the 10% affordable housing quota out. So in effect, it's not happening anywhere else, and I say thank goodness Panuku is pursuing that aspect of affordable housing. Councillor Darby.
Thank you, David. Brenner. Just in the first instance, Mr. Chair, can I just go look at the motions? David, is your expectation today that, well, you're asking the committee to approve the reinvestment proposal? Because I heard you say something like that. Because I note, Mr. Chair, I'm being a little bit cheeky, because the first word is note, it doesn't say approve, and my understanding is that we're here to approve things, support things, oppose things, but I can understand the note in B, that's subject to budget. So can I get clarification? Is the word note the inappropriate word, and should it read support or endorse?
Well, there's been a bit of debate over the last week about that particular word. Sue, do you want to just comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There has been a lot of debate. I think given the fact that the LTP process is subject to conclusion, and that is the actual decision making, the furthest that I would advise you to stretch the word note is endorse. I would advise you against saying approve at this point.
So, Mr. Chair, I think if the mover and seconder are willing, particularly on the A, I would like to see the word endorse there.
I'm more than happy to accept that if the mover and seconder are happy with that.
I'm beyond delighted.
Okay, we'll change that to endorse. Thank you, Councillor Darby.
Thank you. Just further examination of the motions as they are, David. Not all of the transforms and unlocks have high-level project plans, but the motion assumes that they do. Some they are not relevant because there are other guiding documents. I think Ormiston is one, isn't it? It's got legacy documents and it won't have a high-level project plan. So, Mr. Chair, I'm just trying to get, we've got motions here. Motions are binding. And when the motion doesn't refer to all the transform and unlocks, e.g. Ormiston, it needs to be much clearer in my view. Can I just ask David to respond on that one?
Yeah. So look, we think it's an important principle that we have high-level project plans in the program if that's the track we're going down, because that's our key accountability for you. That's the key document for councillors to see what we're planning in each area and to endorse it. So were this concept to progress to approval, we would basically do high-level project plans, a stripped-down version for both the missing locations, which, as you note, is Ormiston, and the other one is Hobsonville. We'd sort of do a retrofit just from an accountability perspective, because it is our view there should be a high-level project plan covering, you know, all the locations in this program.
Okay, so I take it that those legacy strategic documents will be reinterpreted as a high-level project plan. So that covers that off.
We'll do a refit.
And the Avondale one is coming up in October, so there's a little bit of presumption there that will get endorsement. So that's why it says October 17.
Okay, they're all my questions at this time. Thank you.
Yeah.
Kia ora, Mr. Chairman. So I'm just going to change the tact a little bit in terms of asking the question around, I'm interested in the relationship of Panuku and Māori as a significant commercial partner. How is that relationship going? What are your indicators that the relationship is going well, if at all? And are mana whenua at the table? What is it, or what is being done to support Māori mana whenua capacity to engage?
Quite a question. I would characterise Panuku effort since our formation in building engagement and potentially commercial relationships with iwi as one of the stronger initiatives that we've put resource and time into. We have an active mana whenua forum. We have involved iwi in the development of the high-level project plans that were just referred to and the framework plans that follow them. We have agreed protocols with iwi to give a couple of months early notice of any sites that we're bringing to the market, so that mana whenua who have an interest are able to signal that and have adequate lead-in time to prepare some sort of proposal if that's what is wished. We have had a number of sites where there have been active discussions with mana whenua parties about developments, including one that's still active at the moment that I can think of.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Goff.
Thank you, Mr Chair. First question is about the affordable housing. When I was Minister of Housing, I'd sometimes sell a piece of land in Oraki with one house on it so I could build 5 houses in Mount Roskill or Otahuhu. Are you working in your affordable housing objectives on the same principle that if you put affordable housing into a high-cost piece of land, your level of subsidisation will be greater and you'll be able to build less affordable houses elsewhere? Is that part of your equation?
That's part of our thinking, definitely, yes. We obviously have to take into account where we're going to get best value for money. That's part of that mixing, consider how we mixed our different objectives, yes.
Right. The other questions I've got about are actually directly on the recommendations. I'm just wondering if you're able to estimate for us the percentage of costs for transform and unlock expenditure that you meet out of the sale of the assets.
All the indicative work we've done, including the most recent iteration, is showing that we can fund a fully credible investment program and public good expenditure from the proceeds as long as we take them as a package minus the waterfront.
Okay, so it's a self-funding thing.
It's been our objective all along, and obviously we have choices because we can pull back or expand the investment in the public good programs depending on what we realise. But based on our current projections of value and estimations of cost, it's a self-balancing package, and that's what we're effectively asking for. That's what we would manage to.
Okay, I understand if I was in your position I'd probably be pushing for the same thing because then you've got a certainty of income. But I want to look at the logic of it. Why should the scale of your transform and unlock depend on your ability simply to sell assets? Why wouldn't we sell the assets that we don't need and then make a separate decision about how much, maybe more, potentially less, we would invest in transform and unlock? Why is there that direct connection between how many assets you can sell and what you do in transform and unlock?
Well, ultimately, in kind of cash or financial terms, Mayor, you're quite right, Mayor. I mean, it makes no difference, and I guess the bottom line is we're happy to have the resources whichever way it's rationalised. However, there is some strong logic to using the revenue from the sites. I mean, it's quite a common model overseas that regeneration entities are able to make use of the value that's created. It also ensures there's more discipline in the actual entity and its stakeholders around how resources are used. If people can see that if there's a too big a value trade-off on a site or too much spent on one public good project, it has consequences for the rest of the program. So I think it builds a healthy value for money attitude. We've also found it makes a significant difference to community views about the sale of assets in the area if they can see it's going into, I mean, preferably people like to see it spent in their own area, but we're sure we could sell a program like this where people see that there's a prioritised group of areas where we're reinvesting back into them from that asset sales program. So to some extent it is just how you package something, but we think there are some good arguments for doing it in this way rather than taking all our money and then having another process to give us some back.
Are there disincentives in operating a model like that? For example, do you find that other members of the council group are more reluctant to pass assets across to you if you're going to dispose of them to fund transform and unlock? Has that been part of your experience?
Well, to date we haven't had this approach, but as I said at the workshop, unless there's general resistance to the sale of assets at the moment because people see it going to, a big black hole, as it were, and so the natural reaction of a lot of stakeholders is to oppose those sales. And I would see it as a better situation if we can show that there's a reinvestment approach.
Yeah, okay. But you have got flexibility within the system. If I just used a hypothetical example, if you got a big return from the sale of something in Takapuna, and you didn't want to reinvest that all in Takapuna, you might transfer it to Northcote where you're doing something different. You would have that flexibility.
Yes, that's one of the points I think, Your Worship, where it came out. Perhaps I think you had another engagement during the workshop, but that's exactly why we went to a model of treating them as a program, because some areas, if each area spent what it got fully and only in its own area, some areas through just luck would end up with almost too much to eat, and other areas would be left starving. So we have got, which I think is illustrated in that graph in here, and look, this is still indicative, but it shows that there is money moving around based on need.
Yeah. I guess I still come back, and this will be my last point, Mr. Chair. There's an arbitrary element between saying how much we will spend on transform and unlock will depend on how much we sell assets for. You should actually be making a separate decision on how much you want to spend on transform and unlock, and you should have a greater transparency. If you're selling an asset, it goes into the wider pool with, so that you're competing against other priorities in the LTP. If you're working in a purely logical world, that's how you'd operate, wouldn't you?
If you're working in a purely logical world, probably.
Thank you. That's good enough.
Also, Mayor, you need to recognise that often a lot of the purchasing and the selling is for the placemaking itself, so it's quite useful to tactically buy this, because the plan is to put a road through part of that and part of another piece of property, and then it's swapping later to actually get the best advantage. So there's a number of situations, and Avondale's one where Panuka's strategically been buying certain pieces in order to do a swap and a sale later, and it brings a lot more discipline to the placemaking. I will take Councillor Newman.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, I just want to acknowledge and thank Panuku for its assistance at Barracliff Place. Look, I think some of the earlier negotiations, the earlier discussions probably hit the rocks, and some lessons might have been learnt, and that there is a need to really nurture those partnership relationships with social housing providers. I think Mr. McDonald has been excellent, and Panuku's constructive approach to its engagement around Barracliff Place is appreciated. Barracliff's located in my ward, and I want to just commend Barracliff to colleagues as an affordable housing exemplar project. I think that we can make a really good start there, and that will be very good for a lot of people who need that outcome in the south. What I would say, of course, and my continued advocacy around Barracliff will be that it is a mixed housing urban location, so there is a need to significantly capitalise it with a lot of dwellings at that particular location, given its proximity to key transport nodes as well as Manukau. But also too that the percentage of affordable housing at that location needs to be high. It needs to yield a significant cohort of affordable housing. But I treat Barracliff as a win for Wiri, and I want to thank Mr. Rankin for his commitment to it.
Now, I have Councillor Hulse who wants to speak to it. Councillor Fletcher, Councillor Watson, Member Papari.
I've got a question.
Yeah, so who's got a question? Councillor Fletcher.
How volatile are the current projections in terms of value that you're working from in the perfect world? I'm just trying to understand, if you look at the Dominion Road site and your expectations, I mean, I don't want to do a deep dive into individual properties, but understanding the need for revenue for some of these other projects, just trying to understand just how volatile the market is, you know, in terms of your value projections. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, that's something we have to live with, that over time the property market will obviously wax and wane a bit. Hopefully we don't hit extremes, but if you take a 10-year view, which is this LTP, you'd generally expect things would sort of balance out reasonably, but you're going to have slower periods and faster periods. The other point that goes with that is at some points the cost to build some of this public amenity gets more expensive as well because of inflation in which we're seeing at the moment in the construction market. So, yes, you're quite right. It's a dynamic game, and you just hope it evens out, frankly, over time.
Yeah. Which is sort of really following on from where the Mayor, his line of questions on that. Can you just give us the history to the site in Dominion Road as it was purchased by Auckland City?
Yeah, look, I think Dominion Road's a good example of how we endeavour to achieve the revenue sales target you've given us. It was a site that was bought, I think, in the early 2000s or the 90s. I think originally the idea was a park and ride or something. It was declared surplus, and it wasn't in a transformer and unlocked location, so we treated it as an opportunity to get value back for ratepayers. But because we're mindful of other objectives, we thought about its location, the growth strategy, so we realised it was a good place to pursue height and density. So we actually purchased the adjoining site to get a better development block, better in terms of quality and the fact that should make a statement about good, well-designed, high-density site. We're looking at maybe 100 units probably on that site, and it's been through the urban design panel. It's achieved very positive feedback, and it will achieve a good level of value back for ratepayers for that investment.
I think it'll do much to enhance council's reputation in terms of
I think so, yes.
But I'll just remind you, it was actually purchased for the earlier light rail proposal that would have gone through. I mean, I'm not sure whether you recall that quite correctly, but given the assurance that is not required for the new proposal for light rail, I think it's good to see a development there that will enhance the reputation of council and release much needed funds.
Councillor Watson.
Thanks. I've just got a couple of questions around the comments to do with optimisation of service assets. If I remember back to that meeting in 2015 where that went through the Finance and Performance Committee, I can't quite recall there being a hugely exhaustive list of what constitutes a service asset other than the obvious thing of like an old library or something like that. What sort of things exactly are we talking about when we talk about service assets that local boards might be able to do this deal on?
Well, the 4 or 5 that we're actively working on as pilots, because this stuff is fairly slow and hard to execute, as you can imagine, tend to be community buildings of one form or another that are pretty run down on and are underutilising quite valuable sites. And so the propositions generally are that we get a developer comes in, redevelops the site, replicates that community facility either on the site or maybe somewhere else, but puts housing, for example, above it, or maybe some mixed-use development. So as I say, there are 3 or 4 I can think of with different local boards that we're working on right now. Some are involve redevelopment of one site, some are about selling one site completely and putting all the value into another site and getting better use of it. Another example could be poorly utilised local parks, of which we know there are a lot, that make good residential sites, and you put the money into either buying a better value local park or getting more value out of a well-used one in the locality. So that was the rationale for that policy.
Okay, so I hear like community buildings and perhaps local parks.
Yes.
So we're not talking about the ability, to say, okay, you can sell off that, but we prefer if that was used in some transport thing, like some facility that's really needed. They won't. It will have to be kind of like for like is what I'm.
Yeah, it's basically taking value out of the community assets area and reinvesting it back in the community assets area, and it got too complicated trying to bring in transport stuff. So,
okay. So community assets, anything.
Libraries, parks, community facilities,
everything
that kind of thing.
Right. So realistically, in most local board areas, that optimisation, other than if we go to local parts, is going to be relatively restricted, the ability to do that in most cases.
Well, when you look in total, there are actually a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of underutilised community buildings of one kind or another on expensive sites, and there are a lot of underutilised parks which in the modern sense probably don't provide a lot of value. So I think over time we'll see a lot more of this, particularly with the pressure on the council's capital budgets, and we are getting a lot more interest now from local boards because they have to be an agreeing party to these or we don't bother.
Okay, so they must agree.
Absolutely, we don't waste our time on any that the local board isn't fully buying into.
Thanks.
And Panuka showed a few examples in the workshop last week. So, Member Taylor.
Kia ora, Mr Chairman. E mihi ana ki a koro e tēnei wā. I was sort of following on from Tony. There's a couple of levels for me, is that the report talks about opportunity for Māori in terms of business investment, but it doesn't say much more than that. And then in the Māori impact statement, I think it was paragraphs 52 and 53, talks about this an involvement with the high-level plans around narratives and the like. So I got two levels of questioning here. One is around that latter part in terms of, you said, I thought, around resourcing Māori to be involved with that. How can you evidence what you've been doing for that? Because you've said that, but how do I know what actually that means? Because just saying it's not enough, in my view. I'm not sure to what level you actually are investing in Māori in terms of the resourcing for capacity to be engaged with, which is based on that foundation charter, I think, which I have no idea what that is. But yeah, how will you be able to evidence what resourcing you are providing? Because word to me is it's not enough, it's not happening, and there's some dissatisfaction. So I'd like to be able to find out from Panuku how you can rationalise what you said about that progress.
Yep. So just to be clear, I didn't say that we were currently resourcing those. That is a live issue, and we're discussing that. What I was really saying was there are two strands to how Panuku has engaged with Mana Whenua since we were formed. One is to fully involve Mana Whenua through the use of extensive forum activity in our planning for both high-level project plans, the framework plans, the initiative recently or currently with the waterfront and city centre. The second thing that we've been trying to do, which is very much still a learning journey, is how we build more meaningful commercial opportunities with Mana Whenua. And a start with that was this 2 months prior notice period that I talked about. And there is an active discussion now about whether we have to look at maybe resourcing some of that, but that's not been concluded.
So, okay, because I raised my questions, Mr Chairman, on the basis that it's gone from notes to endorse in A, talks about the high-level project plans. The Māori impact statement, in my view, basically was leading me to believe that that was progress in terms of working on that. And raised some concerns for me now that what I've heard is actually in order to limited resourcing occurring here, question around specialist advice support for mana whenua to be engaged in all this, and now we're moving to endorse something that hasn't really got, I think, any meat to the bones in terms of what has been said about Māori in this instance. So, I mean, again, when will you get to that stage, do you think, David, in terms of that engagement with Māori so that they can participate in these high-level plans, project plans, and adequately, really?
Well, we've actually had very high levels of input and engagement from mana whenua on the high-level project plans and in our framework plans. That hasn't been an issue. There is, if you like, a cumulative council family issue about the amount of engagement expected with, the time and resource commitment I expect, I sense cumulative for mana whenua around engagement with council family, and we got that feedback with the city centre and waterfront. Significant piece of work that's going on now. But certainly to date, we've had, I would say, very strong mana whenua input into the high-level project plans and the framework plans. Where I think we are less mature, and it's an active discussion, is so we make early notice, we give early notice of development sites or sale sites that are coming up, whether there's a more active role for us in trying to assist a mana whenua entity or a subsidiary of it or a partner to equip themselves to put in a bid. That's still an open debate.
Just on the business plans that are referred to, will you be providing those business plans in the draft form to the Independent Māori Statutory Board to be able to identify the specific outcomes agreed with mana whenua before you endorse it?
When you say business plans, you mean business cases?
Oh, business cases, sorry.
So the business case tends to be more looking at the, I guess, the financials of it. But I think what you're getting at is after the framework plan, we have a stage in our process which is program business cases, and that is something we would expect to engage with mana whenua on, yes.
Yeah, which would hopefully reflect those outcomes that you're...
Correct. That's where we move to implementation mode, yes.
Sure. So my question was, will you provide those to the Independent Māori Statutory Board so they can see those as part of their legislative obligations?
Program business cases, I would expect that we would be happy to share, yes.
Thank you. So just to remind me again, last question, Mr Chairman. Is mana whenua a strong emphasis for Panuku in terms of seeing them as a commercial partner?
Probably the honest answer to that is increasingly so. I mean, a lot of the reality, as you'll know, is that many have not had the resource base to date to take development risk or be able to invest in sites, and that's seen as changing rapidly now. So our expectation as an organisation is that will be more substantive over time.
Okay, Mr Chairman. Obviously, I would encourage that sooner rather than later. I think the capacity is growing and opportunities are becoming available for Māori, particularly mana whenua, to be seen as an integral part of what's going on in the future in Auckland.
Yep.
And rather than seeing a whole lot of external parties or international investors being put before them. So.
Yep, and we've, I think, actually following the feedback I had at the Waterfront City Centre workshop, we've offered to come and have that discussion with the IMSB soon.
Thank you, David.
Councillor Cashman.
Mine's really a comment, Mr Chair. You wanted to...
Yep, we're down to comments now.
So I'm a little bit uneasy with endorse, not because of the general theme of what's been proposed here, but we're flying a little bit blind here. So we haven't had a report from the board on the actual numbers on some of these big projects. And I think endorsing it right now may be just a little bit preemptive. You can put endorse with principle or go back to the note, in my humble opinion, just to give ourselves some comfort room over the figures through the LTP, I would say would be a more precautionary and sensible route.
Well, you're appealing to the mover and the seconder again, so not to
You
me.
can move it as an amendment. I'll second it.
Let's go back to note.
You're moving it?
Yeah, well,
Second it?
It's pointless then.
Councillor Darby.
Mr Chair, this is a committee of the whole, and I thought we made decisions here. We don't just read reports and then don't do anything. It's quite unusual for a motion to come up with just a note. That's what you do in workshops. You get to this table and you make decisions. I accept the note on the B. I accept the note on the B, but I support entirely the mover and the seconder, and I hope they stick with the endorse for the A. Let's set the direction here. And this is, the first is a strategic setting, and then the B, we come to the issue that the Deputy Mayor raises. We come to look at
each individual
all the line items and the allocations. So we're safe with the B. And we're also safe and we're clear about where we're going in the A. If we went back to just notes, the question is, why did this report come at all for us to note a report? Come on. And this is where I remind myself of that saying of the chair of Auckland Transport, we need to lubricate the decision-making process. Remember that? So let's just proceed now, as we have been asked to, I believe, from listening to our staff from Panuku, to show some clear direction to them. That's what the A asks for. And then we'll get down to the numbers in the B. So just, if I can continue speaking to the motion, I totally...
I'd like to speak as the move. I'd like the chance to speak to the motion as well at some stage.
I totally endorse this direction in the A. And the use of the word endorse. Look, there's a certain tension here, Mr Chair, because I...
Point of order, too.
I want to ask about clarification on process, on what's happened here and what Councillor Darby's speaking to. Originally, the motion was moved as notes, and then without any other thing other than someone saying we'll change, it goes to endorse, and now we're saying we're seeking an amendment to change it back to notes.
No, there is no amendment. At the moment it stands as it is. Endorse in A and note in B.
So there was no amendment to change the original recommendation of notes?
I have not received an amendment. No, that was a suggestion which I was happy with and asked the mover and a seconder whether they'd change it to endorse. They did, and there were no murmurings around the table at that time. And yes, Councillor Cashmore has brought something up now, but that's his prerogative. Anyone can bring it up at any time.
Oh yeah, well, because I support that.
I mean, look, I'll comment really quickly here.
Can the mover
What A does and endorse does is it's actually, that's the reason we set up Panuku.
Yeah.
That's is endorsing Panuku, why we set Panuku up. Okay, so that's all I'm saying. So, Councillor Darby, have you...
I was just about to conclude. So I have a tension here. I represent the North Shore ward, but I also represent the whole of the region. But just within my ward, it's going to require the cross-pollination of capital from Takapuna to regenerate Northcote. It's still the North Shore, and the Northcote is in dire need of resuscitation, revitalisation, whatever term you might need. But if we just approached it on straight reinvest out of the unlock into the same unlock, Northcote would not come out of the ground. It would just be dire forever if we followed that logic. There does need to be a bit of generosity across the boundaries here. And I think there's a willingness in my wider constituency of the North Shore to see that cross-pollination of capital, to see another part of the wider North Shore be revitalised. It's been a long time coming, and there has not been the political will and determination to actually see Northcote lift out of where it has been for a long time. Takapuna is already rising and it's doing pretty well, and the market will eventually, probably 5 years after our interventions there are complete, the market will actually take it on to the next stage. And I also just do want to make a note about Dominion Road, Mr Chair. I think Dominion Road is a substantially better outcome than just putting it on the market and potentially seeing it go to a purchaser who might have given us best buck, but they could have actually just land banked it. That was one of the outcomes that could have, if we had, if Panuku had have just taken our motion from 2013 and put it to market, it could have just been land banked. Fortunately, Panuku have looked at wider strategic outcomes in terms of density, creating density and good design outcomes, engaged a good architecture firm, put it through the urban design panel twice, and we're getting 100 units. We're getting 9 retail units, a mixed-use development. It is definitely not a gated community. There is nothing that can suggest that that development is a gated community. Never was, never will be. But look, thanks, Mr Chair. I'll be endorsing the motions A and B as they're written.
So just point of order, Mr Chair. I was under the impression amendment was moved and seconded.
Yeah.
Shouldn't we be speaking to that amendment as opposed to...
I wasn't aware there was an amendment. I asked, it was just suggested, and I asked the mover and the seconder if they would be happy to change that word, and they said yes.
So
No, I'm talking about...
Which is quite okay. I'm not aware Councillor Cashmore said he was moving an amendment. He didn't. Councillor Fletcher said, why don't you move an amendment? It hasn't been said. There is no amendment on the table. No one's moved it. No one's seconded it. So that's the way it is at the moment. And Councillor Hulse.
Speak to the
Yes.
motion that I've moved.
Yes.
And hopefully that may bring some clarity. Just remembering from standing orders, the recommendations that are in our report are a guideline. We then make the political decision on what we move. So there's no amendment involved. I'm moving that we endorse this, and I'm clear about that. The seconder is clear. I just want to cover a few points, and I want to just, in the first instance, address the issue that Member Taipari raised. And I think we might just need to clarify. I think I'm hearing there are concerns that this is somehow endorsing plans or some sort of operating process for Panuku. What I'm reading clearly in the Māori impact statement is that the unlocked locations offer significant scope and opportunity to deliver in all aspects to Māori and offer the opportunities for some exemplars to be developed and work with Māori as a potential commercial partner. The critical piece is on page 86, which says, however, there's no operating budget to fund unlocked projects to develop non-recoverable operating expenditure, and this includes master planning, design, engagement and feasibility work that needs to be undertaken. So without the ability to cycle this money, it actually makes it more difficult to work with Māori, to partner with Māori and to look for those unlock potential gains. It simply becomes, let's flog off a piece of property, put that money back in the consolidated fund and have our fingers crossed that it somehow comes back as an opportunity to develop this as an exemplar or a good piece of work. And maybe we might find a developer that might work with Māori. I think it's completely the opposite of the concerns that are being expressed by the IMSB. This actually offers potential and hope. Business as usual doesn't, or it makes it pretty damned hard. I agree with Councillor Darby, and that was the point of my enthusiasm to change this to endorse. We're in the business of city building. We're not just in the business of property management and, operating as a bit of a monopoly board for moving bits of property around. To put it quite simply, without the ability for us to have a bit of a closed loop on this funding, we miss the opportunity consistently to develop exemplar projects that allow for the kind of affordable living that Councillor Casey's talking about, for the kind of sustainability and critically world-beating urban design that Councillor Darby and I are talking about, and for simply building the kind of communities that our community expects. The bottom line is, unless we can pre-invest in developing good community outcomes, we aren't actually going to be able to push that density up. We can build all the houses we want, but we actually need to build the right kind of communities in which to put them so they become homes. We've made housing our number one, and it's the Mayor's number one priority. In the 12 months since we've been this new council, we've built 6,827 homes. We should be building 14,000. So what we're doing at the moment isn't really cutting the mustard. This is saying, let's actually lubricate the process and let's actually get on and build and make this happen. And without the funding to do the kind of planning and community building that we need, it's not going to happen. So, Mr. Chair, I think we need to put on our 5-10-year time frame thinking and get away from simply just trying to cut the budget and cut the rates for the next couple of years, because that is not going to drive this city forward. Thank you.
And remember, Panuku has to get on with things. So if you look at item 14, I mean, this, the part of item 14 relates to what we're doing here and endorsing the proposal to reinvest. So I have two more speakers, Councillor Hills and Councillor Casey.
Amendment.
So we've got Councillor Hills first.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not 100% sure why this has suddenly become controversial. This is the same mechanism we use for the transform. We're just saying that it should also be used for the unlock, because there is a lot going on in the unlock categories, and I would probably assume even some of those unlocks should probably be just made transforms if that's easier. But, this is either funded through rates or through the profits of, or future profits of things within the unlock and transform locations. And that's what it was set up on the transform. Secondly, Panuku was created after the LTP, the last LTP, so they don't exactly have the budgets to be doing what we're asking them to do. The other thing is, if you look at Wynyard as the exemplar from Waterfront Auckland, everything was set up in the beginning end. The restaurants, the parkland, the space, the community investment was there, and then afterwards we start collecting the profits that we invested here, because suddenly we have something to go by, something people want to buy into, something people want to invest in, because and that was the whole, well, what I see, the whole point of Panuku in the first place. People on the shore, nothing has been sold in 6 or 7 years. None of the proposals that were put up to Kaipatiki while I was there were sold. We actually increased land to get Northcote off the, and things will be sold at the end point. But to get Northcote up and running, we need to invest at the beginning, and that might mean moving money around. And I think if we wait till, we're going to wait till the LTP, or we're going to wait for another year and hold these projects up? I think the teams are already buying and moving around properties and investing in businesses and other things, so we can actually work this up. And if we don't get in now, then we're going to be in a sticky situation where actually the whole point of Panuku is not going to be able to do the job we've asked them to do. I'm personally concerned about things like affordable housing, first-time buyers, and I bring it up all the time, but we haven't set that up. The Mayor hasn't put that in his letter of expectation. That is not, we don't have the funding for that. So I'd like, the future, maybe we're working much closer with the government and working on affordable housing schemes that way. But we have to be real here. We either try and use ratepayers' money to fund affordable housing, or we don't do any of this development at all. And I don't want Panuku to just be a buying and selling, bits of land. That's pretty boring and unimaginative, and we're actually not going to get probably the investment we could get if we invest first. And we're not going to get things like in Northcote, new community facilities, new parks, new cycleways, new public spaces on rates. We know we don't have that funding, so we have to do this to eventually get funding that is not ratepayer funded. So we either support Panuku to do the work they want to do, or we just sit here again and wait, which I don't think is a good idea. Thank you.
Well, the bottom line is if we throttle Panuku, a government will come in and just put in Economic Development Agency anyway, so basically this is our chance to do it ourselves and do it properly. Councillor Casey.
Yeah, I'm back to where we were at the beginning of this meeting. The purpose of this paper is to inform the committee and provide clarity. We've been informed and clarity is being provided, but we're not there yet. And before I get accused of throttling Panuku or, you know, trying to be a naysayer, we're supposed to be working with the local boards, and Panuku in its report says, if you look at page 89, Panuku is aware that there may be a wide range or a range of views from other local boards which are not captured here. There's only 4 local board views that are captured. They're all positive, that's great. But I'd like to hear from the other 17, and that's supposed to be what we're doing. And I know it takes time and it's messy, but there is no rush here at all. So I'm very happy. This was a voting report. I must have missed the bit where you changed it to something else, because I wouldn't have supported that. So back to noting, so I'm moving that we, as the report started out today, we're noting something, that's fine, but there's more work to be done here, especially with the local boards. So if there is a seconder,
Okay, so you're moving an amendment, Councillor Casey. Do you have a seconder? Okay.
Yeah, I've got a seconder.
Right, well, we're back to square one. So we have an amendment, okay? So the bottom line, I'd just like for councillors to actually reflect on what Councillor Hulse said. 6,000 houses built. In the last year, we need at least 14,000. Why not? Let's slow it down some more, I say. So we have a mover and a seconder. So the amendment is note. Okay, so I'm going to go back to note on the first one. Now, who would like to speak to this?
Oh, come on, Ross.
Right, Member Taipui, why not?
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I support the amendment. I support the amendment. And of course, when you rewind the webcast, you're going to be able to see what happened in a matter of order today, when it was originally moved, notes and second, and then it was changed to endorse without any formal amendment. And so I say that's the proper process that was actually held, and you have evidence of that because things were videoed. So rather than be sort of told,
actually,
well, hang on a minute.
Member Taipui, I'm going to just put it. Councillor Hulse actually pointed out the process. The process, there's nothing wrong with the process and the way I handled that.
No.
I'm allowed to do that. That is prerogative. Okay. Now there's an amendment, and we're accepting this amendment to be voted on.
That's right, and that's why I'm supporting the amendment as it was originally not moved and seconded, based on the recommendations of the staff. And I support that because of the words that have already been said. There's more to be done. And it's my view that there is more to be done as well. And we don't need to be rushing into endorse. And I hear that it may be starved of resource. Well, if that's the way it is, that's the way it is. But it needs to have more work done, and I'm going to support the amendment.
Other speakers?
Just vote on it.
Yeah, I will say something briefly. It's this sort of motion. This is one of the things that contributes to the housing crisis that we've got. It does. It does. It is the slowness of decision making, and I witness it here at this table far too often. There is a crisis to provide housing out there. I thought we were giving Panuku some strategic direction here today to proceed to address that issue in its small part. This just puts the handbrake on it.
It does actually, because if I'm hearing from some people, you know. So anyone else that wants to speak to this? Right, so I'm assuming you want it by division, Councillor Casey?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you.
Right, so we're going to have this by division. So the amendment in effect is just one word, which is taking out endorse and putting in note.
Spoken me out of the vote.
Councillor Clow?
No.
Councillor Casey?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore?
Yes.
Councillor Collins?
Against.
Councillor Darby?
Against.
Councillor Filipaina?
Against.
Councillor Fletcher?
For.
Councillor Hills?
Against.
Member Kake?
For.
Councillor Hulse?
No.
Councillor Lee?
Against.
Councillor Newman?
For.
Councillor Sayers?
For.
Councillor Simpson?
For.
Councillor Stewart.
For.
Member Taipari.
For.
Councillor Sir John Walker.
For.
Councillor Watson.
For.
Right, it's carried 11 to 7, so we now go to the substantive. So we've got 1 and 2 substantive. You want that by division, anyone?
No.
No. I'll put those two motions and moved. Actually, I'm asking, does the original mover want to still be an original mover?
Actually, no, because I agree. I think we are going backwards, so I'll let someone else move
I'll take my name
vanilla,
off the second as well.
a
Okay, the
vanilla
mover and second are
recommendation.
taking their names off, so proudly stepping up is Councillor Fletcher and Councillor Simpson. Got the two motions. We've got a mover and a second. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? No. Right. Thank you, Brenna.
Blimey.
Thank you for the report. Thank you, David. Right, we move on to item number 12. John. And Cecilia.
Very confused.
It is, it's
totally ridiculous.
It'll come back.
John.
Okay, thank you. So this item on group policies, look, I'll take it as read. This asks for approval of group policies on procurement and insurance, which have been developed in line with the protocol, which was passed by the governing body in April of this year. It also notes that we are in the process of developing group policies on Treasury, which I hope to bring back to this committee next month, and also on sensitive expenditure and business cases, which we'd like to bring back to this committee either late this calendar year or early 2018.
Have any questions of John?
Good work, team. Good work.
It is. Councillor Collins.
Thanks, Chair. Just in the policy, you've got, so I'm looking at 5.2 and 5.3, value to our Māori, and then 5.3 is being sustainable. There's the bottom, the final bullet point under 5.2 says, where appropriate, we'll work with Māori-focused organisations, central government, and the TSI to facilitate outcomes. I was wondering if it's possible to include a bullet point similar under 5.3, which might strengthen our local commitment to, again, perhaps community organisations and, again, TSI. I'm just wondering if that would make sense to add that just to firm it up.
Jazz.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I believe that's already addressed in terms of the actual bullet point regarding our suppliers' social responsibility practices, etc. But if that's not the case, we can review that. In terms of local outcomes, sustainability looks at economic, community and environmental outcomes. So we didn't feel it was any need to get that specific again in terms of particular organisations as such, because otherwise that will necessarily reduce the scope of what we're trying to achieve.
I'll speak to the motion. Thanks.
Can I ask, with looking at these policies, it appears to me it sort of presupposes that the centralised model for this approach to insurance and what have you, that there will automatically be a lower premium if there is a consolidated effort, but that doesn't necessarily, that's not guaranteed across the entire group, is it? I mean, there may be, some of the CCOs might be able to negotiate a good deal. What's to presuppose that you, because we're big and centralised, will be cheaper?
Through you, Chair, I'll just go back probably to the example of the insurance policies, which were renewed this year on a group basis. We saw benefits across parent and all the CCOs, because the reality is we do have buying power, and it's important that we leverage off that.
Which I understand as an aggregated statement, but for the individual CCOs, they might be able to negotiate a good deal. Where I wonder if we're sort of talking past each other here, because yes, there is a good aggregated result, but the CCOs have their own board, their own management structure, they operate, you know, in accordance with their own constitution. So I mean, I'm just wondering, are we presupposing that yes, there's going to be an aggregated result which is favourable to the collective, but actually individually it might not necessarily be?
Through you, Chair, I think we're probably looking at two things here. One is the process which we go about, let's say, procuring insurance.
Yeah.
And there might be a good case here which an individual CCO has a really excellent method of doing a certain part of it. Now, what we should do as a group is embrace that, but then still procure on a group basis to get those benefits from the economies of scale.
Right.
John, perhaps you could just further explain the insurance and the underground assets and how we had no cover previously and now we do have cover.
Yeah. So, through you, Chair, so there's aspects here about cost and economies of scale, and there's also part of the reason for looking at group policies is eliminating risk. So to the Chair's point on the insurance of underground assets, we had a situation previously where council had cover for, this is council parent, for its underground assets. Watercare did not. So we could have got into a situation where we had a major event, we had two different brokers looking at it, different insurers, some assets covered, some assets not covered, which again exposes the council to what I'd call preventable risk.
Councillor Holes.
Just a quick question. So, just around the procurement policy, that's okay. So, in here we've got some good wording around the delivery for best value for dollar, but understanding in there the delivery to a variety of outcomes and multiple outcomes. So given some of the discussions we've had around social procurement, is this still covered in here? So this is procurement that achieves a variety of social outcomes. Yep. And this has been best demonstrated by some of the excellent procurement that's been done as part of the Southern Initiative, where we procure goods and services that have a good value attached to them, a good dollar value, but also very good social outcomes as well. Just to make sure we're not losing that focus.
Through you, Mr. Chair, it is in terms of 5.3 and this sustainability principle around, again, positive environmental, community and economic impacts. Now, this, of course, is the policy document and policy principles. There will be a framework that comes underneath it in terms of the sustainable outcomes, so that will very much call out the social procurement aspects. And, in fact, the group-sourced procurement program at the moment is working, has a working group already set up to address that. So that includes Auckland Transport and Watercare, and of course Auckland Transport's doing some good work with the Southern Initiative at the moment. So all of those activity and learnings will be called out in that framework, and that framework will apply across the group. So that's the intention of making it clear in the principles and applying across the whole group.
Okay, thanks, Jess. Thank you.
Right, we have no more speakers or questions, so I'll put the motion. We have a mover and a seconder.
I wanted to speak.
Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wonder if I can actually note some kind of an amendment, because I think that it's important. Here's an opportunity for us to really state out there, nice and bold for all to see in the policy statement, that we want local community organisations, TSI, to facilitate the sustainable outcomes listed under the smart procurement, which is incorporated in 5.3. When I was chair of the local board, I remember David Collings, chair of Howick, consistently talking about, oh, you know, we'd have things going on in our area and we had people coming from miles away to come and do that work. So the constant message from Chair Collins, was how do we keep it local? How can we apportion part of the spend to ensure that local community organisations, TSI could facilitate it, are being looked at to facilitate some of this work. I'm not saying that we go out completely and just throw it at them, but I think we can make a really strong statement today by matching it up, because we've got the statement already in bullet point 4 under 5.2, and I don't see why we can't have a similar statement under 5.3, which makes it very clear that we want to encourage local community organisations and TSI to facilitate some of these outcomes. So I'd like to, I don't know if that's I'd like to move that as an amendment just to add that one bullet point to the policy document, because it is not inconsistent with what's already in there.
Policies.
Where possible. Yep. Can I speak
What
to
are the words?
Just what you said, whether we, Sue.
Through you, Mr Chair, Councillor Collins, if you're happy to work with us on the wording, what you'd like to see, the officers and I are indicating that we can accept that.
So that doesn't require an amendment. We're giving the undertaking in front of the councillors that will happen.
Excellent.
So thank you, Mr Chair. I'd just like to support that, because I think it's a cost saving as well. Where possible, it's not always possible, and it might be more effective and whatever to take things across the board. But where possible, I think it's a good message. You know, buy local for local. Yeah. Thank you for it, and thank you for embracing that, staff. Thank you.
So remember, we were deciding to do that at Waiheke and Great Barrier anyway, so just be adding to it. Okay, so I don't think there's anyone else, so we've got a mover and a second to this, so I'll put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? All right, we'll have a 5-minute break, and just a 5-minute break if we're trying to wrap up by 12:15.